Hey guys, hope all is well. I am trying something new today, seeing how the software works. If I like it, oh, I'm looking at the wrong spot. There you are. Hi. Trying something new today, new little bit of software. If it works, I'll keep using it. If it doesn't work, I won't use it. But let's get started. So, today we are taking a look at the beginning of our new little unit. We want to start talking about circles. We've been dealing with circles all year. Now is when we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty with their definitions and things. So let's make sure we all know what a circle is. So the definition of a circle is exactly the way we've dealt with it before. A circle is a set of all points equidistant from a fixed point, which is known as the circle's center. I'll make that a little bit bigger. Oops. So a circle is the set of all of the points that are equidistant from a fixed point. That fixed point is what we call the center of that circle. There we go. So here you see I've already started a circle here. So I can go ahead and I can mark that circle's center as being right here. So there's the center. Now we also know of another special kind of line, which is known as that circle's radius. We know that a radius is a line that just connects the center of the circle to a point on the circle. So again, next word that we already know is a radius, which is a line segment with one endpoint at the center and the other on the circle. I think as I'm typing, it's shifting my line segment down, so I may have to undo that for a bit. So right there, I've got my radius. Now, if I went and I extended, and rather than this radius's endpoint being at the center, instead it was all the way here on the opposite side, and it went through the center, that's now a diameter of this circle. These are all terms we've seen before. Nothing should be too crazy. Nothing should be too surprising. Where we start getting into new things are some of these new terms. One of which is, what happens if I take this line segment, but rather than it passing through the center like this, what if I shifted it over and instead this line segment connects one end of the circle to another point on the circle, and it does not pass through the center? That is what we're going to call a chord. It's spelled just like a vocal chord or a guitar chord, C-H-O-R-D. A chord is any line segment that goes from one point on the circle to another. And just like we can draw an infinite number of radii from one spot and keep going out, we can do the same thing with a chord. I can say, here's one point on the circle. There's another point on the circle. And then I can go ahead and connect them to give myself another chord. Now, it's really important just to point out what I said, which was those points are on the circle. Remember that in math, we only consider the circle to be these points on the rim of it. All of this space, this white space, is not part of the circle. The circle is just the rim, the outside boundary. You might say, oh, this is the region bounded by the circle or the area inside of the circle, but the circle is just those points that actually make up the circle, the rim of it. Okay, so we've talked about radii, which is the plural of a radius. We've talked about diameters in the center. Now we've talked about chords. The next thing that's really important to understand, it's one of the most important new ones we're going to see, is what are known as arcs of a circle. We've talked about arcs before when we've used a compass. We've went, all right, let me set my compass down on a certain point, stretch it out, and then I swing it around. Then I make one arc, and then I make another arc, and then we draw our lines that went through it, and so on. We kind of very loosely used those words arcs before, so let's talk about it. Again, I can pick a point on the circle and another point on the circle, and then I can go ahead and connect those points and call that line segment a chord. But just as easily, I could say, when I take those 2 points on the circle, they're also tracing out a portion of the circle. That portion of the circle is known as an arc. So an arc is literally just a portion of a circle. So again, you can have an arc that's really tiny, and it's just like that. You can have an arc that's almost the entire circle around. The thing that's important to talk about here is, if we were to use the analogy of a pie, an arc is a portion of that outer crust of it. Or if you're talking about pizza, the crust of the pizza. We are not talking about a slice. This is not an arc. We would call that a sector of the circle, and we'll get to that later. But for now, it's important to just know an arc means just that outer rim or portion of a circle. Now, you may also notice that when I picked these 2 points here and here, I didn't have to go around it this way. I could have just as easily taken the long way around. Now let's say I named this point here point A, and I named this point here point B. This first arc that I drew here is what we would call the minor arc. It's the small one. And if that's a minor arc, you probably guessed it, the big one is called a major arc. So, in the case of the minor arc here, how do we label these things? Like if I wanted to just draw in this chord here, I might call that chord AB. Oops, I forgot the word chord. Chord AB. But rather than say the phrase arc AB or minor or major arc AB, we have a shorthand for arcs. Just like you've probably seen before with line segments, sometimes we'll draw a little line on top of it. With arcs, you would say it's the arc that goes from A to B, and we literally draw an arc that goes above it. So that there would be minor arc AB. Now, in this case, I would just differentiate. I would have to say this is minor arc AB, major arc AB, and that's when you would actually write out the phrase, oh, major arc AB. Or sometimes, a little less commonly, you'll see major arc AB, like that. So, there's another way we might name these things. If you think back to angles, sometimes I would say, oh, this here is angle A, and I would name it by just saying, oh, that's angle A that I'm talking about. But sometimes it's not clear what I mean when I say angle A. In this case, calling this angle A it's not precise. It's ambiguous because I could be talking about this angle down here, and I don't want that. So what we did then was we did other letters on the legs of that angle. So I would then say, oh, you mean angle BAG. And then I'd be talking about that angle in there. We're going to do the same thing with arcs. So to start, I'm going to place 4 points here. I'll make this point A. This will be point B. This will be point C. And then over here, I'm going to make point D. So let's say what I wanted to do was I wanted to trace out this arc. Now, I could say the phrase minor arc AC, because remember, to go between any 2 points on the circle, there's 2 ways to do that. You can go the short way, or you can go the long way around. In this case, I want to specify, I want to go from A to C, and I want to do it in the short way. Again, I could say minor arc AC, or the other way we would do it is we would say, well, it's an arc, and it's going from A to C, but it passes through B on its way to get there. Arc A, B, C is the way you would read it. The same way I've done that, I can say, oh, you know what? Now I want to talk about the big one, the major arc here. I can just as easily call that arc ADC. And there you have it. It's quite simple, really. It's just a matter of saying, I want to go from A to C, and I want to pass through D to get there. Oh, I want to go from A to C, and I want to pass through B to get there. We can name all of the other arcs in here. I could say I've got arc DAB to go that way. Or arc BC would be a really small arc. But if I said arc BAC, that means I would go from B and go all the way through A, almost tracing out the entire circle. Now, talking about tracing out the entire circle brings us to the last thing we need to talk about. We know that every circle has 360 degrees in it. Now, whenever we've talked about angles or degrees in a circle before, we sort of talked about it as, picture if I were to open up this angle. Well, here would be 90 degrees. Oop, I didn't draw that well. Let's see if I remember how to erase. There we go. If I opened it up here, well, that would be a 90-degree angle if I were to draw that angle up in there. Or here would be 180, here would be 270. But if I ran it all the way around, that thing I trace out on the outside, that would give me the full 360-degree circle. You can also think of that degree measure as being what portion of the circle I trace out. And here's what I mean. Let's say I traced out the part of the circle that went from here to here. Now, the little guides that Microsoft Word threw in here actually really helps, because you can tell just by looking at this that I've traced out exactly 1/4 of this circle. And again, if I said, call this A, call this B, I could talk about how big that arc is, because obviously arc AB, the minor arc, is a lot smaller than the major arc AB. Well, exactly how big is arc AB? We measure arcs in the same unit we do angles, with degrees. So how I'd write that is really simple. The same way before we would say, oh, the measure of angle A, we would just say the measure of arc AB is equal to 90 degrees. And we might specify somewhere in there that I'm talking about minor arc AB or major arc AB would be 270 degrees. Versus if I then placed in this point here, called it C. And if I asked you, give me the measure of arc ACB, well, to go from A through C through B, well, that would just be, I'll just subtract that 90 from 360, 270-degree arc. So, radius, diameter, chords, and arcs is what we just talked about there. I'm going to hold up there on this video, take a look at it, see how well it came out, see what I can improve on, and we'll move on from there. Thanks.